Okay. Okay, peeps. Let's get start to action. So my name is Vignesh. So for the next few sessions on the PDP, I'll be with Ajay sir, Varun sir, and Kushal sir, having some good fun. Yeah, particularly for Indians, productivity is reduced. Oh, productivity is reduced. Interesting. Okay, thanks for that feedback, Mayur. Okay, so let's get to the session. So before getting into the session, uh, I thought quickly will set down certain ground rules as to how we would like to take the session forward. So with that thought, let's start the session. So this session is completely about, we'll focus on the historical aspect as to how exactly we have come up or what's happening on the history. We'll take you through a small briefer sessions as to what has happened in the uh, what has happened historically in our country. So this is the quick agenda for today. So first we'll start with overview of session. So I'll take you through exactly what you guys and girls would be learning in today's session. And then a very short introduction as to how this entire sessions have been structured. So once these two overview is done, I'll take you through till 1850 time frame, followed by we'll close the sessions with questions if you have any, and conversations if there are any, we can build on it. So before getting into the slides, there are a few ground rules which I wanted to let you know. So the first one would be after every slide, I'm going to give a minute or say 10-15 seconds depending upon the slide. So if you have any questions, feel free to post it. So we'll pause after every deck, we'll take some questions, and then we'll go forward. So one request is that let's maintain the decency, decorum of the online chat forum. Let's not get into any unnecessary arguments. Healthy discussion, debates are always welcome. Okay. Point number two, all the sessions would be very generic. So since it's 9 p.m., I'll also not ensure that so much of content is being pushed out. So just feel free, relax, and have a great journey ahead. So this is the baseline. So if you're okay with this, send me, guys, stop typing some big messages. Let's get into some emoticons aspect. So if you're okay with this, just send me a thumbs up. If you have some other suggestions, send me a sad smiley or anything that works for you guys. Just that. Thumbs up. Great. Utkarsh, I asked for a smiley and you're typing it. Good. You're so attentive. Thank you, Rishi. Great. So let's get started. So overview of sessions. So what exactly are we trying to cover in these historical sessions is what we'll try to give you a thing. So usually most of the session starts with what exactly you guys and girls would be learning from this. But for a change, let's do something different here. Yep, thank you. Okay, the first thing is, first we wanted to make clear what you will not learn in any of these sessions. So what we are trying to do is that you will not learn hard dates as to on this date what happened, on that date what happened. But however, we want you to have a vague understanding of the years which you would be using to have a tentative timeline. We don't want you to also by heart those by heart those years, just have an understanding as to what happened. Remember, the purpose is just to have an understanding of how the events have unfolded and also understand what holds relevance for now. And next, what you will not learn in this session is conspiracy theories and stories on history. And most importantly, the third point is why history is left oriented on our right or the right or vice versa. We'll not get into any of this, and trust all the sessions which we have planned so far to you in the coming days and from starting from today. It will not help you answer question number 3, right? And lastly, this session will not help you anywhere to engage in whataboutery across social media platforms. So Varun sir and I, we were having discussion. So interesting point on whataboutery came in. So when you're free, read about how it started. So now these days it has become a trend to involve in whataboutery and try to put some facts down by even more horrible facts, which does not create a very healthy and conducive thought process. So if your objective is I want to remember the dates and I want to understand why our history is so biased, sorry, this session is not for you guys. So this is only just to have an overview of the events which are unfolding in. So these are the points which you will not learn in any of the sessions. Fine. So next we'll see what will be the takeaways from this session. So at the end of every session, you will have some kind of an understanding, or you will have some kind of a thought process as to how we have come so far. And next, as a B school student and as a future leader, it is very important to have perspectives, and that is very important, which we always try to make sure that students at CL, you especially in our centers, you need to garner that, because it is very simple, guys. You have definitely cracked the cat and you're definitely going to get into B school. Now how else you're going to differentiate when you start having your B school discussions with the peer-to-peer learning, or down the lane when you are a leader of an organization? So perspectives are important. So this session, these sessions across all the spectrum, yesterday you would have had a wonderful session with Bivin sir. So all these will nudge you to develop perspectives, learn it, and start practicing on building perspectives. And next, all the historical events have always taught us a lot of lesson. So at times when people rule, either they have not learned the history properly, or they have not stepped back to understand what is it. And lastly, we just want to keep it light. We'll not dig deep into who killed whom or what happened, but probably on a higher level with some fun, just to ensure that knowledge is fun. So any questions? I'll give a quick 1-2 seconds, because there's nothing much in this slide. And any questions, if you have anything to say, feel free to drop on the chat box. You know what? The silence, when students are silent, it indicates two things. Either they're okay, two, they're absolutely clueless, three, it's 9 p.m., it's about to bedtime, and I'm here listening the history classes. So which of these three applies to tonight's session? Is it about economic history? No, it is not about economic history. 3-1. Good, 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 good. Somebody's been really candid about saying it is 3. Good. High five. We are fine. Let's go. Thank you. Shall we proceed? Yes, absolutely. We can proceed. No worries. Okay. Okay. So this the deck here will give an explanation as to how we are structuring out this entire sessions. So starting off with today, these are the various sections which we are identifying. So we'll go with 4 parts. The first part we'll cover from 1498 to 1850, and the part 2 will start with 1857 to independence, and part 3 is post-independence to present date. And part 4, seriously, I've not thought anything about it, so I'm very politely saying I'm not worked on it. We'll work out something and we'll come back to you guys. And somebody asked a question, is it about economic history? At this point of time, we will not be touching explicitly on economic history, but hold that thought for a while. We'll try to put something on that for part 3. Any questions, or you want anything to be covered on this? Any thoughts? I'll give it another 2-3 seconds and then we'll go forward. So can I proceed further? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go forward. Okay, let's start with the first part. Okay, let's start with 1498 to 1600. So what will be the objective of this page or the deck, which is there right in front of you, is to explain what happened from the time frame of 1498 to 1600. So in all this occasion, ever since 1498 or even till at this point of time, seas, oceans have been a really strong medium for trade relations. So we will continue to witness it, and we will also understand that how it has evolved down the lane. So this deck in specific will take you through across the journey of Portuguese in India. So before understanding what happened with the Portuguese in India, it is equally important for us to understand what was happening when the Portuguese entered India. So with that thought, let's jump into it. Okay, so what was happening at the country at that point of time? So one, on a high level, if you look at it, what was happening is that there were a lot of regional princely kingdoms and regional rulers who were ruling India. and India was flourishing on its trade. And from an ruling political clan perspective, Mughal Empire had a strong control on its provinces, and Marathas equally had their significant influence. And in the southern part, we had the Vijayanagara Bahmani kingdom, and we had the Nizam, we have the Wadayar dynasty. All this control, everything was slowly happening, and insignificantly, these are the two empires which had large control. And externally, what was actually happening is that countries. So if you look at the entire global map, Middle East, as the name goes, it has known for its trade practices. So all the European countries wanted to avoid the Arab trap, because what was happening is that they had better access to markets. So in those days, Arab had better access to the Eastern counterparts, and they were acting as an intermediaries. So when they were acting as intermediaries, all the European counterparts were not able to make much money, and they were cribbing about it. So at some point of time, all these countries realized that we need to minimize our exposure towards Arabs and directly engage with the Eastern counterparts. So this was the high-level thought process which was happening at that point of time. So with this note, let's jump into what exactly was the journey of Portuguese in India. So we'll start with 1498 until 1600. So if you look at it, around say 1487, the journey had actually started by Bartholomew Diaz. So initially, this chap was trying to, guys, and one more thing, I'll maintain a very kind of a colloquial, funny language and not to get into a very serious historical discussion. Because the moment we step into serious historical discussion around 9:15, 9:30 before Christmas, trust me, it literally impacts us a little bit. We don't want you to get carried away by that. So relax. So I'll also maintain a very casual term. Okay, so when Bartholomew Diaz started rounding off Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and only by 1498 they reached India. So that was the first step he reached in India. So he reached in India in a place called Calicut, and the person who chaired his ship, the captain was Majid. So instantly, I'll tell a small incident about Majid on the later part, because Majid is known to have developed expertise in trading oceans. So the Portuguese had approached him after reaching Cape of Good Hope, saying that his knowledge of the ocean is very fast and they would like to use his expertise. That was the level of expertise Majid had, and he took the boat, and finally he reached out to Calicut. So that was the first place where Portuguese landed. And then what happened was that slowly a lot of governors from Portuguese they started entering India. So the first one was Vasco da Gama and Pedro. Generally, they we think that they were the rulers. They were not the rulers. They were the travelers who came from Portugal to India. But Francisco, Alfonso, and Nino de Cunha, they were the major governors. So what happened is that after the Portuguese entered India, they slowly started entering into negotiations with the locals. So if you remember on the screen on your left, uh, the main objective of all these Europeans were to avoid the Arab trap and get into the trade with the counterparts directly. So what happened is that they started having discussions with the local rulers, and then what happened is that which have more trade benefits. So if you look at the places historically. Say, for example, it started with Kerala. If you look at Calicut, Kannur, Cochin, all these are influence of so many different cultures. It is all because it's because of the historical roots these places had. So multiple governors came. They spoke with a lot of ruling parties at that time to take advantage of trade benefits. So eventually, it created tussle locally, and that is the reason some of the governors went to extreme levels. For example, Francisco de Almeida and Almeida, in fact, he went on to take severe repressive actions against the Arab traders by holding hostage of their ships to ensure that Portuguese get more trade benefits. So when these travelers, Vasco da Gama and Pedro, went back, in fact, Alvarez Cabral, what he does is that he kills some of the local people because they were in favor of the Arabs in terms of having a trade negotiations. So all these happened, but still Portuguese continued to focus on trade. So interestingly, so the trade was going on, and they started intermingling with the native culture. So by default, what happened is that Portuguese started getting the local vibes. They started setting up artisans, handicrafts, all those things started to happen. So see, this is what happens when trade happens. So when in any place, if you look at how the trade has evolved over a point of time, it starts with a small trade, then it starts intermingling with the culture, and then slowly they start understanding the local rules and regulations. At sometimes they stick to it, at times they just don't want to stick to it. So these were some of the things which were happening with the Portuguese. But let's remember something. Portuguese captured the southern part of the country, say the Vijayanagar kingdom, the discussions with them, and up to Goa with the Sultan of Bijapur. It happened very, very, very fast. And ironically, if you look at it, so on the back of the mind, I want you guys to also keep in mind that when the Portuguese were in India, equivalently at that point of time, Mughals were still ruling the country. Let's not forget that. We'll come to that point in a minute, why I mentioned it. So what happened is that, so during this time, it was a peak of Akbar's career in India. So Portuguese had also their agenda of promoting religious conversions, and they thought when Akbar, so slightly taking to a note on Mughal tenure, I'll not get into much detail, but I just want to quote this incident to have at back of your mind. So Akbar wanted to have a complete every multi-religion thought process, and he encouraged different thought process and views. So that is known to all of us. So what happened is that when he invited the Portuguese fathers to the kingdom, they thought this would be the right reason to make sure that the Akbar and his entire courtyard is made to embrace the Christianity. But unfortunately, what happened is that it didn't work out. But slowly, what Portuguese tried to do was that they started playing around with public in terms of their open baptism, everything, which didn't go very well. So this was on one touchy, sensitive aspect of the Portuguese. And eventually, what was also annoying the Mughals was that Portuguese started involving themselves in dishonest trade practices, and they were known for piracy acts, all these things. So this, so if you look at it, all their journey started so fast, and slowly they started disintegrating. So this is a very short story about Portuguese, how they started and where they ended. So the reason, and one more point to remember it, Portuguese were the first to come India and they were the last to leave. So it was around say 1961, government of India had to send them out forcefully after capturing. So this is all about the journey of Portuguese with on a very high level to understand. So I'm gonna leave you here for 2-3 seconds, but before that, I just want you to think something else after stepping back. I want you guys and everybody to step back and think, what has this taught us? So when trade happens, generally, what are the things which generally happens internally? So keep this in back of your mind. I want you all to develop your own perspectives and thoughts, and we'll connect later. So I'll take few questions and then we'll go for the next one. Portuguese, yes, they occupied state of Goa after the after a conflict with the Sultan of Bijapur. In fact, they took it and they made their settlement there. Everything starts with trade. It is not in the name of trade. It starts with trade, and slowly they start getting into the system. Did I answer your question? Yep. Thank you. See what happened. Okay, I'll go the question from Swarna Deep. So what happened is that they did have a very good equation with Arabs. So when the Portuguese came, what happened is that what really excited these Mughal emperors was that the naval army. So when the Portuguese came, their ships, all this thing at that point of time, when we look at it, all these were excessively covered with cannons, which at that point of time, the subcontinent rulers didn't imagine any that of. And if you look at Mughals, they were completely on a landlocked basin above it. So above south, when we look at the entire penetration of the Mughal empire and kingdom, their exposure to seas in a way where it was not as much as what was there in the Deccan part. So they were to completely take away and by the naval power of the Portuguese, and they just wanted to have more naval power understanding. How did they come? Why did they not want? How come regional? Okay, just let's go one by one, 1 minute. So, Swarnadeep, I think I did answer your question. If not, drop a ping. Regional rulers of South India didn't allow Portuguese to capture Goa, but what eventually happened is that the rulers were fighting amongst themselves. in a very straightforward answer, and then this gave the reason for Portuguese to play around. And in the ball, and they thought that this would be a better safe place for to them. And eventually, with assistance of Bijapur Sultan, they settled in Goa. Internal reasons are the main reasons for them to establish their empire. They did not want to trade with Arabs because Arabs were charging them more on the pepper and spice trade. Okay. Utkarsh, why Portugal's captured Goa? Some of the states which they captured initially was not meeting their strategic requirements. So eventually they were pushed above, and all the conflicts led them to the top. We'll come back to that later, but at this point of time, I would just want to leave you with that point. And capture of Constantinople. Yes, we so okay. So the discovery of sea route, all those points. There is a bit of dilemma here because I thought I should also touch that upon in the world history there. Because if you know the breakdown of Ottoman Turks, that was the major trigger point in the globe which shifted all this happening. We'll come to that point later. And no worries. Why they wanted to avoid Arab, I think we've answered it. Okay. Okay. So we'll go to the next session, folks. And one more important thing. So when I said oceans have been the medium for trade relations, and this will take new norms in the future, what actually happens is that these keeps new patterns kind of they keep emerging. So if you look at Indian Ocean region, when you have time tonight, read more about Indian Ocean region, and I'm going to suggest a book at the end of the session, which after you finish your CAT admission process, feel free to read on if and only if you're interested. So right now, Indian Ocean, if you look at it, it is taking more of a strategic importance. So through Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, only these folks they entered India. But if you look at the previous administration of US, sorry, the current administration, Mr. Donald Trump, he's been aggressively pushing for the maritime requirement in Indian Ocean region to counter China. So point is, all this teaches us one form of the other that the mediums keep changing. So what started off with ocean at that point of time still holds its relevance today. So read about that when you have time. Abhimanyu, can you please reframe your question? I didn't understand. Quad countries, India, Australia, US, Japan. These are the four countries which are together in this Quad format, and they are trying to improve the security regions in the Indo-Pacific region. So on a different note, just for your information, so this entire Indian Ocean region is going to be extremely what is it? Extremely cautious in the down the lane because exactly the Malabar Exchange is you are right. So that is the point. So if you look at the global map, there is a choke called Malacca Strait. So Malacca Strait is an Achilles heel for the Chinese trade route. Chinese, yes, I will repeat the countries. Just give me a moment. So that trade point to come up with this, China is trying to maneuver around the Indian Ocean region. So when it is going around Indian Ocean region, China is trying to establish footprints. You can search for what is called as the strings of pull strategy. And what China is trying to do is they're trying to have more control. So through Quad, they just wanted to control the rising China. Yes, Hambantota port. Yes, for it is not 99 countries for 99 years. They have taken the lease artificial islands in South China Sea. Let's not go at this point of time. You are right, but I'm not going to touch this at this point of time. We have it for later sessions. China is pushing for CPEC on the above China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and Suhrit, it is not relevant to what is happening in Indian Ocean region, but in a way, yes, it aligns with their strategy. So name of the countries, Quad countries, Japan, Australia, India, US. If I'm missing some country, please feel free, let me know because it's been a while I spent some time on that. Okay, so yes, Gwadar port in Pakistan, yes, it is related to it. But let's come to this point at the end of the session. Ranit, just drop me a ping on this at the end of the session. Australia, okay, Belt Road Initiative countering the actions of Kuwait. No, it is actually the other way around. In a subtle way, what these countries are trying to do is counter the Belt and Road Initiative. But for the last, say, from Feb 2020 to December or October, November 2020, I've not seen any Chinese representatives speaking in an open forum about Belt and Road Initiative. So with the limited observation which I have, I think it has taken a backseat, but we'll have to wait and watch. So let's not jump into Belt and Road Initiative. We'll cover all this in the later sessions. Quad, we are not sure whether it is temporary or permanent. It is a strategic alliance, so by default it will be there for a long term. I'm not aware of the time frame. I don't know. You could be right, Vignesh, on the time frame. Okay, guys. So let's jump back to the discussion. Let's go to the next deck. This is the last question I'll be taking. Yes, yes, Anant. Australia did not join for the last decade. They accepted this because of a diplomatic reason, strategic reason, because China is giving very hard time to Australia, and Australia wanted to contain China. And Australia is one of the leading business partners for China, and China wanted a lot of access of its minerals. Australia has huge deposits of minerals. China wanted to enter that market. Australia is denying it, and Chinese are getting into some unwanted actions there. That is the reason to counter it. Australia has decided to join. One of the very important reasons why they're joining it. Okay, and recently, if you would have, uh, yes, they do not want to use the term officially because they don't want to annoy the dragon at this point of time. That coal exports are being denied. We'll come to this point later, not now. Please, it is with the foreign policy things, not at this point of time. We'll talk about this later, not now, gentlemen. Okay, moving forward. So far, if we have seen till 1600s, we have seen what happened with the Portuguese. Now let's try to understand what happened in 1600 to 1750. So in short, the subcontinent was like a piece of cake, and there were a lot of domestic fractures between the kingdoms, and it was very easy. So there's always this debate in history that whether these countries came to India to, to establish their political power, or they came to India just for a trade perspective. To take a very cautiously optimistic route, they did come only for trade, but the local situations were so conducive that they decided to take the entire country for a ride. Let's look it into that aspect also. And it was on spot moment when things got decided. Okay, so what are we going to focus on this deck? So from 1600 to 1750, I'll be taking you through the entire journey of three different countries which came to India on a very high level. And at the end of this deck, you will understand how one country had the significant part. So far we are focused only on Portuguese on a higher level. We'll try to limit it the same tone and ease of understanding. So quickly taking a minute, guys, are you able to understanding, or do you think this is getting overloaded? Just give me a very short quick feedback before we jump in detail to this question. It is getting overloaded. Are you comfortable with this tone? Fine. Okay. Okay. Okay, till now that sounds very diplomatic. Great. Okay, so he's like, let me see how the other slides go, then we'll decide. Good. Thank you. Thanks for your feedback. So let's start. So we'll try to understand how these three countries, entered the country from 1600 to 1750. And you know what, guys, one more thing which I wanted to mention, the timelines which I mentioned on the top, they are not the uh, milestone based events. For example, if you look at it, when somebody says 1947, what strikes is that independence. So I have broken down this timelines in such a way that to accommodate the flow of information. So there will be plus or minus here. These are just mere approximations. And again, as I said earlier, this is just to give a rough understanding of how we have grown. So this, say for example, if I say 1600, countries started coming in, Dutch would have entered in 1 or 2 years late. The Brits would have entered 1 or 2 years closer, and the French would have been slightly later. That's it. Just to ensure the flow of information. Yeah, you're right, Dinesh. Okay. So 1605, the first factory was founded in Masulipatnam, and now slowly, and they captured the Nagapatnam near Chennai, and this became a threat for Portuguese. So the Dutch started establishing their factories in 1605, though they entered around 1604, 1602, with slowly entering the area. And eventually, in parallel, the Brits started establishing the East India Company in 1600. So interestingly, I just want you to recap and take your memory to the previous deck. If you remember, in the previous deck, when the Portuguese were entering in India. At this time, Jahangir was ruling, and the later part of Jahangir, Akbar started ruling. So what happened is that at that point of time, the Brits in 1609, they had their presence in Jahangir's court, but unfortunately, because of the Portuguese present at that time, they wouldn't have got the conducive environment to do their trade. And the very first East India Company factory is set up at Surat in the year 1613. So if you look at it, the Dutch also came, the Brit also came, and eventually at the later part, we had the French also entering up the Masulipatam. And slowly, the French even went ahead to set up a township near Calcutta. So slowly, what happened is that these countries they had more advantage, or they started flattering the local rulers and eventually taking control of them, and they started establishing their settlements. And the Brits were very aggressive about it. They focused on free trade, and they got so if you look if you read, if you want to spend some more time on it, if you read more on the Brits growth in India, they started securing what we call as farmans, which are the trade requirements. And at a very peanut price, they got a lot of concessions and security. And the worst part, for example, if there is going to be a British settlement and the ruler has to provide the army and the ruler has to pay for their security. So these are the kind of various concessions which the Brits got. And the French also started directly putting a settlement in Pondicherry, and slowly it became their presence and they expanded to other places. So if you look at it, they came to India as traders, all these countries, and slowly they started establishing their settlements. Now, what was happening is there were a lot of commercial conflicts between these countries for trade advantages, which is bound to happen and it's absolutely natural. So the Dutch and English, they started having their trade clash interests because of their claims, because of an incident in Indonesia where the Dutch had murdered some of the English security guards. So because of which they entered into an agreement and they decided to pull out. And globally, there was an Anglo-Dutch war because of ideological reasons which was happening, and the English had retaliated, and the Brits had a very great naval power, as we'll find out as we come down the lane. And what happened is that they decided to focus only on the trade, spices trade of Indonesia, and they started focusing their attention. So, say around 1700s, the Dutch were nowhere in the picture. So that leaves us with the Brit and the French. So if you look at it, what was happening is that the Brits started spreading their arms slowly. So they started having more discussions, and by 1639 they established their St. George Fort in Chennai, in Madras, and slowly they started having the Calcutta Fort Williams at Calcutta. So eventually, what was happening is that at that point of time, there was another East India Company which was set up because some of the employees of the existing East India Company felt that they were not given much due care and they were not getting what they wanted. So another East India Company was started. So what happened is that the Crown and the Parliament both ensured that there should not be two East India Companies which should be working. It should be only one East India Company. So it was merged. So that was a very important step, and that became the center of political power for all the events which were bound to happen in India. And in case of French, what was happening is the Anglo-French rivalry was happening. And any event across the globe which is happening somewhere, keep this point in mind and try to correlate with whatever is happening in the world. Some corner of the world, some event will happen, but if you look at that, the domestic changes will have its major impact. All these are tied to history. So the same thing happened at that point of time, and even now the same thing is happening. So what happened for the rivalry in Europe, it had its impact in India. So what was happening? So if you look, say around say 1740s, the South India had a lot of camps which are supported by both French and the English. So there are a lot of Carnatic. There were three major Carnatic wars which were fought between English and the French. So this was the outcome of the Anglo-French rivalry. And what happened is that after the Third Carnatic War, the English kept winning on all these wars. So what happened is that after the Third Carnatic War, the French decided to just stay on Pondicherry and focus on their settlements, and they were not allowed to, get into any kind of power sharing agreements or whatever it is. So in short, summarizing what has happened so far, we saw how the Portuguese came. and they went to dust. Then the Dutch came, they went to dust. And out of the British and the French, which stayed back significantly, the British finally stayed back. So this is the key message of what was happening. So I'll pause here, take your questions, then go to the next step. Yes, Shivam, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Ah, okay. We're getting some very interesting questions. Do we have to remember these instances? No. Farmans were granted to foreigners because what happened is that, uh, so what British was trying to play around saying that if something happens, we'll give you security. And what made Indian rulers do this? Our Indian rulers were insecure pricks. So there was fight between one among the other. So they wanted some kind of a security. So the British decided to take advantage of it. What did they get in return? They got nothing. They said, the Brits said, we will support you, but nothing. The French and the British supported. Vignesh, I don't know your answer. Ah, not on top of my mind. I'm able to recollect that. Can I come back to you later? I don't know. Okay, sure. Very valid question. EIC was a corporation which was initially made only for trade. And slowly, as the Brits started having more control, as I said earlier, they decided to establish their own foothold here. Anand, you know what? It's a very tricky question. We cannot dismiss off by saying that the empire, the Mughal empires didn't retaliate to the growing power of British. We need to understand the dynamics, what was happening at that time. It was a very vast empire, controlling such a vast empire over a long period of time, it doesn't happen. So history has been teaching that. And the problem, we'll come to that point later, but I just want you to remember this. One of the major reasons why the emperor started, the Mughal kingdom started falling down, one of the major reasons is lack of succession planning, or it's a family despotic rule which resulted in one of the reason, not the only reason, why it was a big uh, challenge for them not to focus it, and they had their own power struggles within the entire kingdom. So that part of one of the main reasons why they were not able to have a significant control across the regions. What type of trade they were doing, who were doing what trade? Can you reframe that question, Utkarsh? Yes, Ranit, Aurangzeb was busy fighting. Yes, 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 exactly, Sorit, you are right. So that was a very costly affair for Aurangzeb. You should have stuck to Akbar's policy. It is not about British overthrowing French. Let's understand something here. So the French were not very serious about India from the beginning. They thought, let's throw a stone from trade. Let's throw a stone from trade. And if something works for us, it's fine. The kind of discipline and the kind of power which with the British came, uh, it was not able for other countries to replicate. For example, let's say this: the Britain Enterprise East India Company, though it was controlled by the crown and the parliament, the rulers, local British agents here, say Robert Clive or whichever ruler who came here, they had absolute autonomy in implementing what they wanted to implement. Whereas for the French, it was the government. So all the decisions were caught into what we can say as a bureaucracy trouble. and all decision making had this sum. So, for example, if some troops had to be mobilized, the Brits had all the balls to do it, whereas the French, sorry for that word, it came in a flow. The French had to wait for the approvals and go on. Fundamental bureaucracy issues plagued them. Okay, Utkarsh, like trading from Portugal to French. So, what all they traded? Spices. We'll come to those points later. Spices, raw food, raw materials, cotton, handlooms, handicrafts, crops, opium. These were some of the things which were getting traded from India as a raw material and was going out. And one more thing, answering to that point, where yes, at some point of time, if you look at it, countries also, yes, Indigo also, countries give up certain colonies. Let's remember, subcontinent was a colony at that point of time. So the French at the global arena were also thinking, is it so? It is like, you know what? I'm just trying to draw an analogy to what is happening in the present. See, when countries are embroiled in some kind of a discussion or a closeness setup, there is always some critical strategic questions which goes beyond the doors. Is it worth doing or is it worth losing? For example, let's take the present day Eurozone as an example. We'll come to this later, but I just want to have this uh, thought which we'll revisit later. So, for example, Eurozone is a costly affair. So, some of the very deliberate discussion which is happening at this point of time in the everybody's closely watching is, when will Eurozone collapse? So some of the economists are saying, is this marriage worth saving, or to save the marriage, is it better to ensure that it collapses quickly? So the same call, if we'll have to reposition at that point of time in history and look at it, probably French, after all their rivalries, they decided that after the Anglo-French wars, which was happening abroad in the Europe, they decided that, you know what, let's focus with what we have and let's not dig too much of into what's happening in India. So probably with what happening in subcontinent, this might look as a big thing, but from a global dynamics picture, in subcontinent would not have been a major strategic goal for French at that point of time. One of the reasons why they didn't very aggressively push back. So we'll come to that later. Something interesting also happened. Did India have opium plantations? I really don't know, but the trade on opium did happen. By the way, why is the question on opium so explicit now? I'm just throwing some air on it. Okay, so can we go to the next section? Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so far we have seen how these countries entered the subcontinent and how they have, you know, started having a control. So in this deck, what we'll understand is that how did the British have their complete consolidation in the country and what all they did. So we'll try to focus on the key aspects and then we'll understand how things started changing. Okay. Again, it will be a macro level understanding. And again, as I was mentioning earlier, the discipline, the military, and the leadership which the British had, none of the other countries were able to replicate even an inch of it. So let's start with 1757. So 1757, if you look at it, the Battle of Plassey, which was being fought, so that laid the foundation of British rule in India. So in fact, if you read more about it, the Battle of Plassey was a war where the winner was decided earlier because of a traitor. Let's not get into those aspects, but just try to understand from a high level. So Plassey laid the foundation, Battle of Plassey laid the foundation of the Brits' role in India. And what happens that slowly after Battle of Buxar, it gets the eastern part of also under its control, under the then Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. So the consolidation at this region had already happened after these two events. And then when we look at it, the other significant thing which was happening is in the Mysore region. So what was happening in the Mysore region is that at this point of time, the power centers in India were focused mainly on the Mughals, the Marathas, the Mysore kingdom. Okay, so we'll now focus on what is happening in the Mysore kingdom. So what happened is that British wanted to have control in the Mysore kingdom at the then Mysore kingdom. So what happened is that they joined hands with the Hyderabad kingdom and the Maratha and said, let's go for a war against Hyder Ali. So what happened is that eventually the war kept on longing, and Hyder Ali lost. So again, what happened is that Hyder Ali decided to, bounce back, and he decided to get along with the French. So keep that in mind. At this point of time, the global rivalry between the English and the French is going on, and they're just trying to iron it out their difference. So what happened is that when Hyder Ali got in touch with French, English by default they're about to get annoyed. And what happened is that eventually American War of Independence was happening at this point of time, and all hell broke loose. So what happened is that again Hyder Ali got a big hit. It didn't work out, and the treaty nothing worked in favor of Hyder Ali. So in fact, if you look at it again, this is a point to prove the internal fissures which were there in that our country, all the external factors were able to make use of it. Look at the insecurity of Marathas, the insecurity of Nizam. So the British had a lot of leverage between these kingdoms, the princely states, and they went against their own kingdom, which is the Mysore kingdom. And again, what happens? Hyder Ali's son comes Tipu Sultan, and he declares war on Travancore for a breach of trust. So British decides that it is the right time to step into it, and in the war, Tipu loses. So in all these battles, Hyder Ali and Tipu they play a very aggressive war. They take a war against British. Fortunately, the faults were not on their stars. The fault was on their stars. Sorry. And on the third Anglo, in the third war, he loses. And what happens is that his sons are taken as hostage. It's a very sad state. And on the fourth Anglo-Mysore war, what happens is that Tipu Sultan takes time to bounce back and hit the British. He takes a lot of time. Meanwhile, the British they find out this and they again gang up with Marathas and the Nizam to go against Tipu Sultan. Finally, the British wins. In short, in all these wars, the reason why one of the major reasons why the British had a significant win is because they had the power of locals. So if you look at it, the same incident has a lot of repercussions across the globe today. For example, just trying to draw parallels. Uh, okay, we'll come to the parallels at the later section. So this is what was happening in Bengal. This is what happening in Mysore. Now, interestingly, I'll just give 2 seconds. Can somebody take a guess what happened after the Mysore affair of British? Let me see who's getting a hang of it. So the question is, so far the British tried to work around the areas of Bengal. They worked around areas of Mysore. So what next? Hmm. You got it right. Exactly. 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 So they got turned to Marathas. So this is what was happening. Okay, so the British started taking on Marathas. So what happened is the first Anglo or Maratha war happened, and it's a very interesting story about the Marathas. What happened is that the initial first two Maratha wars are fought on the succession plans, lot of succession plans, and the wars within kingdom, and because of which what happened is that the British got more leverage. And in the first two Anglo-Maratha wars, they had a significant win. But eventually, the second Maratha war was also because of the same issue which the Maratha didn't seem to understand. And what was more catastrophe which happened during the second Anglo-Maratha war was that a treaty called Treaty of Bassein. So technically, this treaty gave full leverage for the British for them to station their troops in the Maratha territory. That means what it means is, for example, let's say we have, let's say all of us are in our residences, and we know who our enemy is, and eventually what happens is that our enemies, policemen or their troops are stationed at our place. Though there is a lot of consolation from the other side saying that we are here for your safety, all those reasons, but look, what message does it convey? So this is what was happening in the second Anglo-Maratha war, and that was the treaty which was signed. And now what was happening is there were a lot of stakeholders which were attached to the Maratha army. These stakeholders were called Pindaris, were very aggressive in terms of their war tactics and everything. So they were working very closely with the Maratha army. So in the both first and the second Maratha war, they understood that this was not working, and they felt their sentiments were hate. Their sentiments were not respected. So what they did, they decided to join hands among themselves, and they decided to fight against the British, which didn't work out. The entire concept of Peshwaship was abolished. So if you look at it, this after the Maratha War, what happened is that the British, it had troops present all over India, all over the subcontinent at this point of time. So at any point of time, they were able to mobilize their troops very easily. So I'll be drawing a parallels here, which is relevant at this point of time to make sure that your thoughts are also getting developed on those lines. For example, I was mentioning a point saying that how external factors takes advantage when internally things are not strong. Let's take the example of Sri Lanka. Okay. So this Hambantota port, which somebody was mentioning in the previous deck when we bought it, so that came out because that port was initially constructed to take care of trade. And since trade was not happening and things were not moving, China decided that they will take the entire control of it and use it as for military purpose. So in parallel, the political situation in Sri Lanka was also not as conducive, and that is the reason which happened. So probably the magnitude of what happened during the when the Brits were in the subcontinent and what happens when the Chinese are what they are doing in Sri Lanka, the magnitude is different. But the underlying concept was very simple. Internally, if we are not able to control something, external factors are finding their way into get into it and have a control. And every country does this very openly. And the way they call it, and the way all the countries, including India, we call it as strategic interest of the country, strategic alliance, defense partner, major defense partner, etc. So, and the next point on mobilizing the troops. So, what happens is that under extreme unforeseen circumstances, every country has their troops stationed in an area at times the general public is not aware. So, for example, there is an Indian Air Force base in Tanjore. It's a very closely guarded place. And in Indira Gandhi International Airport, there is a very strong basement location where all the troops can be stationed, which can be moved at any point of time. For all right reasons, government does not disclose any of these things. Unnecessary panic chaos will happen. So mobilizing of troops is very important. And at the same time, going back to the history at that point of time, when these troops were being positioned at Maratha kingdom, imagine by the time the British had already conquered all the Bihar region, Bengal region, Mysore, Hyderabad. So Maratha on the west, it gave them even more leverage to mobilize the army whenever they want. So again, consolidating, so far we have seen how these three countries came in, who took the final lead, and how one country consolidated completely. Okay, so I'll leave here for a minute. I'll take questions, then we'll go to the next step. Yes, French settlements, nothing much. They chose to stick to Pondicherry. They continue to not involve in any kind of empire building activity. They just focused on their trade. So Mahe, Karakal. Why did the British? Okay. Let's go one by one. The British entered the southern part, and they were getting familiarized with the places. So if you remember the previous deck, so that so then since they entered it and they found that it was very easy to get into the power building structure within the country, they started increasing their foothold in the southern part before moving into the other regions. How did the Americans? It didn't have any much direct impact because when America got independence, it was around 1775, and we were just grappling up with our internal issues and these countries coming in. So it didn't impact, but on a lighter sense, post-liberalization, all this, a lot of American struggle impacts us in a big way. Guest 64589. Hmm. Let's talk about that later, not for this point of time. Yes, it was Mir Zafar. You're right. Portuguese kept mum. And answer your question, the idea of unified India is not even there even at this point of time. For all right reasons, government is trying to do that. Let's not get into that from a policy aspect. And so whatever questions which we are trying to answer through all the session, we will not we will not look into an aspect of politics. Let's remember there is a difference between politics and policy making. So as educated people, we should be focusing on the policy aspect, how far it is impacting the country, and let's not getting into politics. So answering your question, well, even at this point of time, every part of the country thinks of it its own. I don't want to I would prefer not to sugarcoat that, but unfortunately, that's how it is. Even at this point of time, let's leave around. Let's drop the media ramblings about it. Utkarsh will do it later. Not relevant at this point of time. Vignesh, why did you send LOL? Hope you are not taking a dig at Ek Bharat Shresht Bharat. Just kidding. So problem. Okay, okay. Uh, See, the reason why I mentioned that statement is if you look at the initiatives which are being taken, some of the initiatives are not going in the direction which it needs to go. So it was not done earlier. Say, for example, uh, let's take, to give an example to substantiate this, let's take Article 35A. So when the abrogation was done, look at the time it was taken to done the abrogation. And the entire section forgot that it had to go by that time. So initially, when that was conceptualized, it was mentioned in Hindi by the then Prime Minister that ye ghiste ghiste gir jayega, which means at some point of time this will fall down. So the fundamental structures needs to be put in the right place, because unless and until that kind of a strong foundation or structure is established, which a section call it as a unified country, certain policy decisions cannot be taken. So that is the reason I had to mention that non-exist. Maybe for all geographical reasons, we say we are part of one, but having a communication or having a conversation with somebody, it doesn't feel that, because we still continue to place self-interest over the national interest. Uh, so we'll discuss it once we touch part 3. And what we can do is that, sorry, drop me this ping at the end of the session. On a again on a side note, I'll answer what's happening at this point of time to give an overall perspective. Any further questions on this? No. So what happened is that all this Maratha rulers or whatever happened, descendants left. So the government gave them pension. So the British government gave them pension and said, "We'll respect you, but please don't interfere in any of the policy making or empire building or whatever you need to do. No rulers concept." So they were left as such. They were part of history. Any more questions? Okay, guys, let's go to the next section. So the next section is going to be slightly interesting. Okay. The next section is about understanding how this condition of our society was there at that point of time. So we'll focus on what are the internal challenges, what was the socio-politic challenges. So the idea of this slide is to give a perspective into how the society was there at when all these countries were entering India. So internally, we had a lot of challenges in terms of succession planning. Unfortunately or unfortunately, what Vamsi, can you please put your question? So what was happening is that the Mughals were having a kind of despotic rule, and there were no succession planning. They were caught up in their own thing, and there was a lot of economic downturn. The Europeans started entering, and it was very difficult for all the catching up which was had to happen. And next, all the regional states were coming up, like the Hyderabad, the princely states. They wanted their own thing, and the Bengal, that region wanted their own control of power, and the independent states of Mysore, Kerala, all they wanted their own power. So imagine the situation from external, some countries are entering the country, and all the internal states and the ruling party, they have all their internal tuffles. Nobody gives a care about what's happening. So at that point of time, to put it simply, the understanding of geopolitical thought process or what's happening externally was absolutely below sea level. Rather than fighting it out with an external party, what was actually happening is that we were fighting within the country, driven by insecurity, the hunger for power. All these things were the reasons why 200 years is a testimony of that. And next, coming to agriculture. So again, the same state condition happened. There was no improvement in the condition of the agriculture at that point of time, and they continued to pay revenues to the state, and there was no innovation, whatever existed. And there were the education centers which were there at that point of time was more religion oriented, and there was no absence of science and technology at that point of time. So keep this, the reason why I mentioned this point specifically of science and tech here is that around say 1400s or 1700s, when we look at it, all this American War of Independence and the thought of Renaissance which was coming up in the Europe, it all had the quest for learning. And what happens is that the curiosity to learn was there in all those regions when compared to what we had. Probably sorry for being harsh and rude here. Probably we bang too much of chest thumping on how much we have internally and what we have done so far. But fortunately or unfortunately, chest thumping doesn't work on a long run, because if you are not going to be curious, learn, develop our thought process, probably we might end up in history and without contributing anything significantly. So that was the kind of learning. So that continues to happen. Let's see if things are changing down the line. And from a trade aspect, we can see cotton, raw silk, pepper, these things were happening. And textile industry, what to speak, any clothing material, anything which went outside from India, it was respected because of its grandiose, the way it was done. So summing it up, there was a lot of internal challenges, and all these countries which came in the name of trade, they had a lot more advantage to capitalize this. And since somebody asked in the beginning, where did they really come for power? They didn't really come for power. They came only for trade. But the situation within the country was so conducive that they decided to have a strong foothold. So we're done with today's session, and I would take questions. We'll have some quick chats, conversations on questions and side notes, and then we'll wind it up. So over to you guys and girls for your questions. No questions? Are we done? Kerala had an independent kingdom under Travancore rule. Okay, so Rith, got your question. Okay, what is happening right now? So before answering this question, I want to give a small, very short, brief note on what's happening across the globe right now. The first thing, what is happening across the globe right now is that countries are going more and more inward, and they are going more and more inward for their own reason. Okay, and let's not try to put a label to it by calling it as a protectionism or isolationism or inward looking, all those kinds. But what's happening is there is a kind of holding back. So all countries want to secure their own positions at this point of time. Because of this, securing the interest of their own people, countries don't want to take a chance of other countries. Say, for example, let's give a classic example of European Union. So if we look at European Union after the British exited the EU, and the discussions are going right now, the problem is there are countries like there are countries like Greece, which are not doing very good in terms of finance, but a country like Germany, which is so powerful, decides what Greek has to do in terms of their crisis. So the problem is people don't like it. It is like, who are you to tell me what I need to do in my house? You better clean your house. So the entire Surit, I'll answer your question. The reason for setting this background, you will get an answer to that. So coming back to it, so if you look at the entire eurozone, politically they are completely different units. Each country has its own way of working, but they are bounded by a single currency. Let's remember that. Yes, there were advantages, but there are a lot of disadvantages because the bigger countries with the bigger economic power in the entire EU decide what happens for the common countries and the smaller countries, which is not fair. So all these countries come together and they look into it and they say, you know what, we need to handle this, we need to do it. So an economic sanction oriented issues, when it comes in, countries wanted to stay close and these countries become more united. Now, historically, when we look at it, countries have been trying to be united in one form or the other. There was one time where the Cold War was a kind of acting as a unity factor. There was one point of time where countries were getting united on technology factor, say post the dot-com bust or the Asian crisis, or during the say when the Kuwait war was happening. At the time, countries got on a different block. So one or the other reason kept ensuring the fact that some kind of a unity had to happen. Unfortunately, these things didn't work out. So on a different note, say for example, the then prime minister, when the first election happened, the points which they told for the then elections to win the power, that was the same point which was used to win the elections these days. That means some of the things which were decided to happen those times didn't happen. So finally, what is happening across the countries to bring people under the same and fault is the country's diversity or the country's own traits in which it was built. That is the reason if we look globally, right now, if you go to any country's website and look up, Google about news of any country, what all countries would do is that we need to focus our interests first, our people first, our thought process first. This is emerging. This is emerging very clearly. This is emerging very clearly. And now, with that back note, answering your question, how do we bring about sense of unity in our country? So with all this happening, we need to first understand what as a country we stand for. So I'm slightly sidetracking here because if we look at all the history so far, every country has defined its own value system, what it stands for. For example, liberty, equality, fraternity was a thought of French Revolution, and this was one of the reasons which triggered every other country. So America started having the liberal values. Today, for example, I'm just going to take another minute to answer this question. It's a very long answer to the question which you are mentioning, but I think you will get a hang of it at the end of it, Surit. So every countries have decided their own value systems. For example, there was a very recent book which was written by the Indian Raw Official Agency, Mr. Vikram Sood. So in that the book they talk about how the countries they put their value systems as a hegemony. For example, how many of you here are aware that all the movies of James Bond or the Hulk or the soft series which we watch, the binge watch, some of these series and movies were funded by the CIA and the US Defense. You know why? through these movies, through these series, they wanted to convey a message saying that we are mighty, we have an extreme open thought process. So if you look at any kind of speech or or a diplomatic statement which is released by the US or China, if you look at it, their values are imbibed on that. They say this policy is in line with US values of compassion, humanitarian grounds, etc. And as another example, let's come to East. Let's see what China says. China says, when any Chinese policy, when they get pissed off, they say, we stand by our own cultural civilization thought process. So China is going back to its old days where it wants to project its sense of pride in its cultural thought process. So with all this happening and coming to your question straightforward, how do we bring about a sense of unity in our country? The first step is that we need to decide and we need to define what as India we stand forward for. What do we stand? So, for example, when we say, I know it's slightly on a philosophical note, but I think we also need to take some time to think about when we say we are an Indian, what Indian defines. Do we have an answer for it? I have not found the answer to it yet. I really don't know what beyond saying in nationality of this, what it is. We definitely don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Now, if you want to talk to an American about it, what do you stand for? Listen to the answer he gives. Or what do the Chinese stand for? Listen to the answer what they give. We are not able to define it. So without defining it, trying to bring about unity is very difficult. Point number one. Now there is going to be some kind of an contradiction to it. Some factors would not be uh, what is it, liking this. Not that they didn't want to do, probably they didn't expect it to happen this way, but all the external reasons are forcing us to take a decision internally to ensure that the blocks are set, and that is how it is going to happen. And if you have some time, just go to YouTube. There is a brilliant talk by external affairs minister Dr. S Jaishankar. Go and search for 2019 Dr. Ramnath Goenka lecture, where he speaks about how the policies are evolving. Let's remember something. What is happening externally determines what is happening internally. Probably philosophically, this statement looks extremely ludicrous, but from a policy and country governing aspect, the bigger picture dynamics is very, 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 very important. So, in short, summing it up, I know, Savrit, you would scold me saying that he didn't answer me directly, but I wish I had the answer to you directly. But the point being, unless and until we define what we stand for, probably government is trying to take policy directions in terms of defining and ensuring what needs to be done is happening. But I think the jury will have to wait and watch to take a decision on it. I hope I've answered your big long question. And if not, we can have a separate conversation over a chai. So moving forward, India was a cash cow. Yes, India was definitely a cash cow. There is no doubt about it. What kinds of interviews are asked these topics? Excellent question. I wanted to get this question. So I'm sorry, guys. None of these questions would be asked in your interview of your B schools. So why are we doing this? Because after raising a cat, after getting into the B schools, and tomorrow when you sit in your company, let's say you are a CEO of a company, and government says that from tomorrow onwards, screw your supply chain. It needs to be, the supply chain should not be dependent on one particular country. So where you will start, definitely you're going to have a bunch of your subject matter experts who are going to advise you saying why we need to go for alternate locations. But as an individual, you also need to understand what has happened so far and how you're able to give in a better position to take a decision. So when you're armed with all this information, you will understand that, okay, what these are the things which has happened in the past. Now, for example, let me even give a simple, straight solution to your question. Say, for example, every 10 years or 15 years, there has been a global debacle. So let's look at the 1998, 2000. If you look at it, there was a dot-com bubble burst. Okay? 99, 98, collapse of Soviet Union. 2008, recession. Now, COVID. So all these things have given some kind of an experience to look into it. So these kind of questions are not asked in interviews, but probably if an interviewer is going to ask you a question, and if you're able to draw back corollary and tell them in parallel, these are the things which happened in the past. So we have an indication to look into the future, how we need to build in the future. Probably they will understand what kind of perspectives you're bringing across to the B school. And remember, The only differentiating factor between your peers in your B school is going to be what kind of perspectives you are bringing into it. 99.9, all your CAT percentiles are gone for a toss the moment you step in. Keep that in mind because all of you will be coming at the same score level. So, Sapan, I think I answered your question. You need not mug up all these things for all your interviews. 18.5, anything after up to 1850, yes, we will touch it up. I didn't want to put so much of thing into it. There's a lot of information. We'll do it in the next slide. Since this is being the first session, I don't want to overburden you with the information, Sibani. And yes, American Center, yes, config and values for China run it. So apparently China is setting up configures institutes across the globe to promote its cultural hegemony. Uh, but this didn't work out. Saurat, can you please redefine your question? But this didn't work out before. What didn't work out before? External factors determine our internal chemistry. You mean to say that what is happening externally are not conducive enough to determining what as a country we need to proceed internally? Okay. You are right partially, but the problem is at this point of time, if we are not tuned with what's happening in a global world, we would be sidelined exactly the way how the uh, okay, let me quote another point here from a historical context. So we'll be touching this in detail, but since you asked this, let me put it here. So India has lost close to 15 years of development. So economically, when we looked at it, say the countries called as the East Asian Tigers economy, the Taiwan, the Singapore, all these countries at some point of time they started China. They had a way significant advantage. So at some point of time, these countries had per capita income lower than India or the same level. But look at today where they are standing. So what happened at that time point was that government was inclined towards left ideology because of Soviet Union. So at that point of time, government didn't engage with any of the external developments which were happening, say globalization, more market forces into account. Because of this, we lost. This is the honest fact. We'll have to admit it because of our own ideological reasons, which at that point of time was absolutely valid. We lost without having a different thought process because we were glued to certain thought process at that point of time, and we eventually lost out, and it took a lot of time later. So look at it, those 15 years lost, and finally to get the IMF loans during the balance of payment crisis in 1991, it took a lot of time for us to get aligned with US because the ruling party at that point of time was a coalition government, and the government was not able to have a control until PV came into the picture post 1992. So answering your question, significant chunk of things didn't work out because we isolated ourselves by calling it as non-alignment, or we didn't want to be part of any block, which was valid at that point of time. But at those occasions, we could have, we had all the energy, we had all the capabilities to relook into a thought process and redefine it. We chose not to for our own selfish reasons. We lost it. So right now, if you look at it, that is the reason the fast-paced dynamics are evolving in terms of policy decisions. Media might say it is rash, it is brash, and using all left thought process. But going forward, this could be the new norm. I hope I've answered your questions, Rohit. Did having Probably yes. So, Anand, to answer your questioning, the resources were taken from the country for their own industrial revolution developments, and the irony being, if we compare the developments which happened because of IR in those countries, nothing happened. So, yep, you're right. Ranit will discuss this during post-independence and world history because we are working out something for you all to understand how the global facets are also changing. So, we'll answer your questions there. Prashant, is your question with reference to history, or are you asking with reference to the existing context? We were neither capitalist. We didn't know. Everybody had their own ideology. There was a problem. I hope I answered your question. Ketan, that is reserved for post 1947. Yeah, Dinesh. The name of the book is titled Mon. Okay, hold on. Okay. Any more questions? Surit, answering your question in short, we will do it. But before that, I think that Bipin sir complete all the economic sessions. And answering your question in a very short format, every country defines this and as its own way. For example, US prides itself in saying that it's a capitalist economy. So what is a capitalist economy? It means market forces decides everything. So ideally, if market forces are deciding everything, why isn't government regulating certain aspects of market? So everything, everybody decides on their own. So for example, so we'll cover that in detail. It is not your second point on we seem to be in khichdi of policies. It's very unfair to make that statement because from the situation where we are to where we are now, some of the policies were absolute disaster, but some of the policies were in the right direction. And in future, the policies are getting a lot of traction and change is happening in terms of way how it is implemented. So let's not shoot pigeons in the air by making such vague statements in terms of policy. And we will cover about certain things in detail. And I mentioned the point on the regulation. So try to read more about it. You'll find very interesting answer. Just to give an example, if you look at it, the Chinese government, it's a state-controlled government. Okay, so it's a communist party which should not encourage privatism, which should not encourage private thoughts. But what the government says is that we encourage state-sponsored private investments or activities which are controlled by the government. So it is like the broad framework is defined and everybody comes in their own way. And on socialism, when we got independence, when India as a country got independence, it was the right policy at that point of time. But going forward, should it continue? We don't know. But has it promised all the results which it should have promised? We don't know. But answer is no to an extent, because if it had promised, if you'll have to look at what happened in the Soviet Union, the famines, how the agriculture sector went for a toss, the entire communist bloc collapsed. That means things didn't work out the way how it envisaged. So why are we still sticking to it? Economists should be thinking about it, and they are definitely thinking about it, because I don't have much knowledge on that line. Okay, so I think I did answer your question. And Huawei is facing the condemnation because Huawei has been so if you look at it, largest number of students who are going to US are from China, India, and other countries. So they have the largest share. The problem with Huawei is that it was started as it was started by the military background. And Ranit, I'll come to your point later. It was started as a military background thought process, and by using their own technology, they were spying on the US thing, and that is the reason the lady CEO was arrested in Canada. And Huawei is again facing condemnation because technologically there is a background to it, and Huawei in a way has become a scapegoat here, because after the Chinese have got into the technology space, the Chinese have no respect for intellectual property and rights. They copycat every damn thing. Okay, so the US was afraid that China learned from best in universities in US, and it is developing something on its own after seeing what is there in US. So from a technology aspect, US started feeling the wrath that it is losing its control. And eventually, one way from a country's interest point of view, they decided to ostracize China and Huawei is the first step. And some of these semiconductors, when we look at it, it comes from China. So slowly, US cannot catch up with China on certain levels on manufacturing because of the cost reasons. But Huawei is the first victim to it. We'll have more such events happening because provided Biden is not friendlier to China. I have not read George Orwell's book, but it is there on my reading list, 1984. I don't know, so I cannot comment. Yes, Ranit, you are right. It's a psychological warfare which China is playing. And one of the main reasons why government of India decided to ban was that. Oh, thank you, Varun. Probably I'll start reading it. Okay, guys, any more questions? So that's it. Thank you so much. Good night. Think about this. We'll have our next session soon and hope you enjoyed. And Merry Christmas. Have fun. God bless. Thank you.